What if the most powerful woman in the DC universe doesn't actually want to be a hero? What if she's not trying to save the world? She's just trying to survive it. That's the question sitting at the center of James Gunn's new DC universe. And honestly, it might be the most interesting creative decision he's made so far. Because the version of Supergirl that Milly Alcock is bringing to life is not the one you grew up with. She is not the bright-eyed, cape-waving symbol of hope standing next to Superman with a smile on her face. She's something rawer, something messier, something that, if we're being real about it, feels a lot more like an actual person than a superhero. And that distinction, that tiny but massive shift in framing, might just redefine what a superhero movie can even be in 2025 and beyond. Let's start with Milly Alcock herself, because her casting alone sent a signal that James Gunn wasn't going for the obvious choice. You know her from House of the Dragon, where she played a young Rhaenyra Targaryen with this incredible combination of ambition, vulnerability, and barely contained fury. She wasn't just playing a princess. She was playing someone who understood exactly what the world expected of her and was slowly, painfully deciding whether or not to become it. That internal tension is what made her performance electric. And when Gunn cast her as Kara Zor-El, a lot of us immediately felt like, okay, he's not casting a superhero. He's casting a character study wrapped inside a superhero costume. In interviews leading up to the film, Alcock has been incredibly candid about how she's approaching this version of Kara. She's described the character as raw, messy, emotionally unfiltered in a way that traditional portrayals of Supergirl have rarely been allowed to be. She's talked about Kara as someone who hasn't figured herself out yet, someone carrying enormous power and almost no idea what to do with it emotionally. And that framing is so different from what we usually get with female superheroes that it's worth pausing to actually think about why. Here's the thing about how female superheroes have historically been written in major studio films. There's this invisible pressure, you can feel it in the writing, to make them aspirational to the point of being untouchable. They're competent from the jump. They're emotionally stable under pressure. Their flaws, when they exist, are usually framed as external, someone underestimating them, a system working against them, a villain who simply can't comprehend their strength. And look, there's real value in that. Representation matters. Seeing women be genuinely powerful on screen matters enormously. But there's a cost. When every struggle is external, the character never really has to wrestle with themselves. They never have to sit with their own ugliness or confusion or fear in a way that makes the audience genuinely uncomfortable. Think about the older live-action Supergirls. Helen Slater's 1984 version was earnest and charming, but largely uncomplicated. Melissa Benoist's Kara on the CW series had more depth and ran for years. But even there, the character's goodness was treated as a kind of baseline moral fact, something the story protected rather than questioned. Kara was kind and hopeful and occasionally unsure, but she was never really lost. She never felt like she might make a genuinely wrong choice and not immediately recognize it as wrong. That version of heroism is comforting, but it's also a little safe. What Milly Alcock is describing is something different, something where the heroism isn't the starting point. It's the destination, if she even gets there. The core shift in this version of Kara Zor-El is actually philosophical. Most superhero stories ask the question, how does a hero handle the weight of their responsibility? James Gunn and Alcock seem to be asking something more uncomfortable. What if this person isn't ready to be a hero at all? What if power, without emotional grounding, is actually dangerous? Because Kara's backstory in the comics, at its most brutal, is genuinely traumatic. She watched Krypton die. She lost everyone. She floated in suspended animation for decades while her younger cousin grew up, became Superman, and learned to carry hope as a practice. When she arrives on Earth, in many versions of the story, she's behind. Emotionally, socially, spiritually behind, even though she's physically more powerful than almost anything on the planet. That gap between power and readiness is where this version of Kara lives. And that is a fundamentally different energy than we're used to seeing. This isn't someone who knows who she is and is fighting to prove it. This is someone who doesn't know who she is and is terrified that the answer might be something she doesn't like. There's a version of that character who makes choices out of grief rather than principle, who uses her strength to protect herself emotionally before she even thinks about protecting others, who might look at humanity, a species she's supposed to eventually champion, and feel resentment before she feels love. That is not Supergirl as a symbol. That is Supergirl as a human being, or as close to one as someone from a destroyed planet can be. There's a reason why characters like this are resonating so deeply right now. We are living in a cultural moment where audiences, especially younger audiences, are genuinely skeptical of presented perfection. They've grown up watching institutions fail, watching people they admired turn out to be complicated or broken, watching the gap between the image and the reality get exposed over and over again. So when a superhero shows up already having it all together, already knowing who they are and what they stand for, there's a disconnect. It feels like marketing. It feels like a poster, not a person, but a hero who is struggling, not just against the villain, but against herself. That feels true. That feels like something worth watching. Because the question is no longer whether she'll win the fight. The question is whether she'll become someone worth rooting for. And that is so much more emotionally engaging because the audience gets to be part of that process. You're not watching someone perform heroism. You're watching someone discover it, stumble through it, maybe lose it for a while before finding it again. This is what made Logan work. This is what made Joker uncomfortable in all the right ways. This is what Joaquin Phoenix brought to that film. A character so lost that you couldn't look away, even when you weren't sure you were supposed to be watching. Milly Alcock's Supergirl is clearly being positioned somewhere in that emotional register. Not as dark as those examples, but with the same commitment to interiority, to the inner life of a character mattering as much as what she does with her fists. James Gunn has been very deliberate about the kind of stories he wants to tell in this new DC universe. He's talked about wanting characters who feel real. He's talked about earn emotion. And if you look at what he did with Guardians of the Galaxy, particularly with Rocket Raccoon, a character who could have been pure comic relief but ended up being one of the most emotionally devastating figures in the MCU. You see the pattern. Gunn is drawn to broken things. He's drawn to characters who use humor or strength or bravado as a shield, and then he finds the exact moment to take that shield away and show you what's underneath. That's his signature move as a filmmaker. So the fact that Kara Zor-El is being built this way from the ground up tells you something important about what Gunn wants her arc to look like across the DCU. She's not entering this universe as a finished hero who will inspire everyone around her. She's entering it as a raw material, someone that the universe and the audience will watch being shaped by experience, by loss, by choice, by failure. And if Gunn plays this right, by the time this version of Kara fully becomes Supergirl in the symbolic sense, it will actually mean something, because we'll have watched her earn it. There's also something interesting in how this sets up the relationship between Kara and Superman, between her and Kal-El. In most versions of this dynamic, Superman is the mentor, the stable figure, the established one. Kara either looks up to him or resents the comparison. But in a version where Kara is truly emotionally volatile and not yet anchored to any particular set of values, that dynamic becomes more complex. What is Superman, a man who has literally never known Krypton the way she has, offer her, really? Can he help her grieve something he never actually lost? That tension, if the writers lean into it, could make their relationship one of the most layered in the entire DCU. When you think about where Kara's story could go, the most compelling direction isn't about power levels or big action sequences. It's about identity formation under impossible pressure. She could easily be written as someone who initially rejects the hero role entirely. Not out of cowardice, but out of exhaustion. She has already lost everything once. Why would she build something new that could be taken away again? That kind of self-protective withdrawal is so recognizable and so human that audiences would feel it in their chests. And then there's the question of anger. A character who has every reason to be furious at the universe, at the fact that Krypton is gone, at the fact that she has all this power and it didn't save anyone she loved, and who has to figure out what to do with that anger without letting it define her. That's not a villain's arc, but it's close enough to one that it becomes genuinely interesting. The best version of this story would make you occasionally wonder whether Kara might tip the wrong way, not as a twist or a gimmick, but as a real psychological possibility the narrative takes seriously before pulling back from the edge to here's what it comes down to. Superhero stories have always worked best when the superhero part is almost secondary. When the costume is a metaphor for something real, for identity, for loss, for the terrifying responsibility of having the ability to help and not always knowing how. Milly Alcock's Kara Zor-El sounds like she has been built from the inside out with exactly that in mind. Not a symbol first and a person second. A person first who may slowly, painfully, beautifully become something worth calling a symbol. And maybe that's the most powerful thing James Gunn's DC universe could offer right now. Not perfection, not invincibility, but a girl from a dead world, standing in the wreckage of everything she lost, figuring out whether she still has the will to care about a world that isn't even hers. That's not just a superhero story. That's the kind of story that stays with you.